Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to another wonderful day. As always, I repeat myself because it is a beautiful day as I'm with the wonderful Jody Hume, who is going to be with us, and she has lots to talk about. And I'm going to allow her to tell us where she's coming from, what she does, and we're just going to go with the flow as we usually do. Welcome, Jody. Nice to see you here. Welcome.
Wonderful to be here. My name is Jody Hume. I currently live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I have a business that does like on-call decision support for entrepreneurs. So I work with a lot of startup founders, a lot of even my more regular business clients are doing something a little off the beaten path of that particular well-established business. Most of my clients are neurodivergent in some way, shape, or form. I mean, a great deal of entrepreneurs are. I think it's like the perfect brain chemistry to have for entrepreneurship. It gives you an advantage, in my not so humble opinion. But I'm also a third generation entrepreneur. So I know a lot about them, and I know a lot about neurodivergence. Both my kids went to elementary schools for kids who are bright, but have language learning issues as well, dyslexia and Adhd. They don't actually have dyslexia, not specifically that, but that's just easier for people who aren't in the know about all the nuances of these things. So I'll just say dyslexic, and then also some ADHD stuff. So it is pretty much everything about my life sort of comes back and centers around this awareness of neurodivergency and where it was a challenge, and then where it actually became like a massive advantage, and why so much of what I do, what I get paid now to do, actually comes out of the coping mechanism, the things that my brain went to instead of the normal pathways it could have gone down. Like, it forged a different one, and that is the thing that I now use to do the work that I do. And so it's a very near and dear topic to me.
Wow. So basically, you've obviously had to live the life of a neurodivergent, and also, may I say, your family, also your children. Anybody else within the family in your circle that's...
My husband was never diagnosed, but he is absolutely, like, he is off the shelf classic dyslexic issues. Like, he just has so many of the same issues. When we first got our kids neuropsych testing to be able to go to the school that they went to, we're reading through the report, and I was like, "Ooh, that one's me," and he's like, "Ooh, that one's me," and I'm like, "Ooh, that's both of us." It's been a great learning experience.
Okay, so let's go back in the days. So you obviously know you're neurodivergent now. Was it a situation that when you was growing up, that your parents knew you were neurodivergent, or was it a situation where certain things were happening within your life as a child, and parents are going, "Hold on, what's going on here? We may need to get her tested. She's losing her marbles. What's happening there?" So just take us back to how that all came about and how you felt.
Yeah. So also keep in mind, I'm almost 51. I'll be 51 in September. So this topic of neurodivergence was not the hot topic. It was, like in 1973, 4, 5, 6, mid 70s, people weren't talking about these things as much. And my mom was very on the cutting edge of what she could easily know about at that time. But, we didn't have Google, we didn't have TikTok, we didn't have as many of most of the books that I have really leaned on to learn for myself and for my kids and my clients were published well after I was into adulthood. And so within that context, though, so they didn't even know to look for that. But there were things when I was going in first grade, I was reading at a much, much, much higher level, but I could not get math. There was some sort of block. I remember my mom trying to teach me to count. We had apples on the hearth, and she would sit with me and she was like, "All right, there's one apple. And then if I put another apple, how many apples are there?" And I would say the first and the second. Like, my brain insisted on making it like chronological or something. It just could not get to add to that at the time I was going to a school where there was a trend or something to teach everything as memorization instead of conceptual. So in the same way you teach mathematics multiplication tables, you just memorize 1 times 3 is whatever. They were trying to teach addition and subtraction that way as well. And I know there's a bunch of different kinds of neurodivergence, but for me and my kids, memorization is a no. Like memorization without connection to deeper meaning in some way is just doesn't work. It just
No,
doesn't work.
it
So
doesn't.
yeah, between those two things, it wasn't working. My mom actually got me tested with the Board of Education. They identified me having like a really high IQ, but they weren't looking for these other things. So they just did like educational testing. So they put me in the like gifted program or whatever. We still struggled there. She ended up moving me to another school that was very progressive, another public school. I grew up in West Virginia, and it was a really progressive public school that did a clustering system. So they put bunch of different grades together and they moved us around. So I moved there in 3rd grade. They put me in 6th grade reading and they put me in 1st grade math to help me catch up. And they made me do math field day and they like tons of math exposure. And by 5th and 6th grade, I was going to county math field day. By high school, I was tutoring math. Like I caught up on that because they actually met me where I was and figured out what I needed to figure it out. And it got me over that hump. But then they also gave me this stimulus I need. Because so for so many neurodivergent people, there's that split of they're extremely good at one thing, but they're behind on another. And that's where they can get overlooked and shoved into a corner by teachers who are like, oh, they're doing fine. That's fine. And then they don't get these other services or vice versa. So that was, but then it didn't appear again. I was great in high school. I got very good grades, took AP classes. I was an engineering major in college to begin with, then switched to psychology, mainly so I could go abroad. You couldn't go abroad if you were an engineering major. And, but by my senior year, I could not pass a language class. I was on my 3rd language class, trying to pass it. I was scrambling and there's a 2-semester requirement at my college. And I don't know that I've ever said this publicly. I was plotting with a freshman in the class to like cheat off him to pass the class because I was afraid I wasn't going to graduate. I've never cheated. I was always so terrified of like, getting in trouble. Ever since a little kid, I don't get in trouble well. So that was but that speaks to how desperate I was. And my wonderful Spanish teacher took me aside and she said, you seem smart. You're working so hard and you're doing so badly in this class. And she sent me to get tested at the in-house speech and language pathology program. And that's where they identified, they were like, yep, nope, this kind of, and again, it's memorization. Like with language, they teach it with memorization mostly. And I think if I'd been sent somewhere, I would pick up any language the same way. I have a wonderful command of the English language, but I wasn't forced to memorize it. And so that was what just didn't work for me. So they let me out of the English classes. And that was my first introduction to, oh, my brain works differently.
Okay, let's work with the memory side of it, because me personally, I've suffered with the memory side of it, which resonates with what you're talking about, and that's a big problem in my life. But what happens, I make sure I put things so the reoccurring things always happen, such as I know where I always put my keys. I know it's, so if I do forget, I know where they are, right? Not because I remembered, but I know my habits. So let's go back to the memory situation, because I'm not sure that a lot of people, when you're neurodivergent, your memory is quite a big issue. So you were saying when it came to learning maths, and when you were taught a specific way when it came to learning maths with the memory, it never worked. What other things memory-wise affected you within your life when you were young that you noticed was an issue?
Well, so I didn't put my finger on this until it was pointed out to me my senior year. I just thought it was, because when something is how your brain works, it doesn't exactly occur to you to question it. But she pointed out that because I have, and so do my kids, have an issue with recall, which is specifically like, as it's been explained to me with my kids later, it's like the Google search your brain does for a specific word or a specific concept. So I deeply struggle with recall. So where that showed up as a kid and all through college is if there was a fill in the blank quiz or question, I would know the answer. And in fact, when I was tested my senior year, I had a very specific example, but this had happened since I was a tiny kid, is it was a philosophy class, and it said blank said you can't step in the same river twice. And I had studied it. I knew who it was, but I just couldn't come up with the name Heraclitus. Like now I know because I went back and looked for it. I couldn't come up with that name. So I did what I had done my entire life is I would draw a line to the margin and I would write. I wrote 3 paragraphs. Like he also said this, he studied with Plato, he did this. And I even said, because this is how my memory works, I said, and it's like the name is like really sharp and like stabby, like Heraclitus. Like I remembered how it felt. Like I could feel it. Like whereas Plato is like stretchy. Like I knew the answer. I just couldn't regurgitate the word. And I think he gave me half credit. He's like, clearly you know who this is. But my whole life I would struggle with fill in the blank like that, because that which is a subset of memory, like recalling a specific thing. And what they also told me was there was one test that they had done where they said, like, if they show you a picture of like a thing you're sitting on, and if sometimes you say chair and sometimes you say seat, that tells them that your brain is doing like a fresh Google search each time instead of just kind of like for most people apparently, but you don't know this if you're neurodivergent, like if you did it recently, it doesn't have to think again. And this showed up with my daughter. She would sound out the word cat on the left page. And then when she went to the right page, she would have to sound it out again. It doesn't like stick right in that bit of where it's just like right there. But here's a really cool thing. She said, I bet that makes you a really either creative writer and creative speaker, because one, she was like, it would be, she gave me an example of like, if someone says a slice of paper, it's not the right word. Nobody says a slice of paper, but it makes perfect sense. Like in a poetic way, it makes perfect sense. And that rings true for me. People often comment on me having unusual word choices. And also I speak in metaphor a lot of times because I can't think of the words I need. And so I describe it either in an actual metaphor, or I'll just use really like descriptive sensory language to get to the point. And what's so interesting about that is not only did that get me through, but in the work I do with like teams and groups, it is so much more valuable to use a metaphor for a team to agree on a concept than it is words, because actual words are wildly misleading. Because if you're using actual, like a phrase like, financial stability or something, that means different things to different people. For some people, that means flexibility. For some people, that means, lack of uncertainty. For some, and so people will think that they have come to an agreement, but they aren't really in like the deeper fabric of what they mean by those words. Whereas metaphor, it doesn't, like it just, because it has a feeling to it. So,
yeah, totally, because you're giving it context. And when I've just listened to you in the last few minutes regarding your memory, I now understand why we generally tend to be quite creative, because by listening to you, we have to describe what we're trying to pull from our memory. So if we want to remember the number 8, and I know this may sound very strange to non-divergents, it's not a situation that we just pull 8. We've got to describe it in so many different ways to pull the number 8. Now I can totally understand, but is it not easier just to say 8 and just pull that? But from our point of view, we have to create a story to be able to pull that singular information. And it may sound strange. And because Jody has just described the whole of that, that's totally understandable why we're so creative, because we have to create a story to pull that one individual bit of information.
Yeah.
And it's true.
And connect it to meaning, which I
Yes.
also think has value. I mean, I mean, obviously this is a very biased perspective because it's how my brain works, but I do really question, the value of any kind of memorization that doesn't tie to value. I mean, I figured this out with my son because there was the most brilliant sentence in my son's report when he first got tested. And I was like, this person got my son. Like this woman really understood him, because it said, while Turner, and he was 5 or 6 at this point, said, while Turner struggles to remember the days of the week or the months of the year, he can in great detail explain how food digests in the stomach and how time travel works. And I was like, that is my son. But with the days of the week, he could not learn the days of the week. I mean, he was like 6, I think, and still just like he recognized the words as days of the week, but they just didn't land anywhere in his brain where they had meaning. And we were driving to school one day, and it was a Tuesday, and he said, "Is it my sharing day for, show and tell?" And I said, "No, no, I'm sorry. It was a Monday. I'm sorry." And that does matter in a second. And I said, is it my sharing day? And I said, "No, your sharing day is tomorrow." And he said, "Oh, then it's Mac's sharing day." And I was like, "What? Wait, what?" I was like, "If your Mac comes before you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, if it's the day after you, whose sharing day is it?" And he was like, "Mary," or whatever. I don't remember. And so we started with, I was like, Mac's sharing, and the first 2 just happened to match up, which was helpful. Mac's sharing day is Monday. And Turner's sharing day is Tuesday. And once we connected those stuck in his head. And then I taught him the structure of the week based on whose sharing day it was, and then matched it back to the name of the day of the week. And then he got it, like, which is so fascinating, because he knew, like, this I find this like so profound. The whole point of naming the days of the week is to create a sense of orientation so that we all know where we are and what's coming next, and it's to create a structure of orientation and awareness. He had that, like he had done that, but just based around whose sharing day it was, not around these like arbitrary names. And so that was such an eye-opener for me. Whenever he struggled to remember something, I would grapple through it to find something that was meaningful to him that he could tie it to, and then he'd be able to remember it. And it just, like, of course that makes sense. Like, why is that odd that our brains want it to be meaningful? I don't think that's weird.
No, I mean, it makes sense to us for sure. But I suppose you understand your child so well because you're very similar to your child. And I suppose to people that aren't neurodivergent, or parents that aren't neurodivergent, I can only imagine how difficult that is, because things are just topsy-turvy and don't look logical at all. But I think because you had that background and you lived that background, it's very easy for you to communicate, number one, with your child, understand how your child can move forward when they found things really difficult. And with that said, give me, when it comes to your children, give me a very difficult moment that they were really struggling with, and how they overcame that struggle with your help, a teacher's, family, whoever. Just give us something that can help our listeners.
So I absolutely do have a story for that. Thank goodness I don't have as many as I would have if we hadn't been, the other benefit to me being on this thread already was we were watching Turner, like we knew, we picked up early that this was probably an issue for him. And so we got him the support he needed very quickly. And it's funny, here in Baltimore, there are 2 schools that are specifically designed for kids who have language-based learning issues, but are otherwise quite bright, so it's, and because that is, I think they call it double deficit. That is a really tricky thing. And this is the story with my daughter. So my daughter did not show those signs. We did not think she had the same issues. And then she went to kindergarten, and they do this thing called the Dibbles test in kindergarten, where it's part of it is the visual part where it's purely sight words. Okay. And then the auditory part is much more nuanced. I don't understand all the things they're testing, but that's normally where kids struggle. That's the more advanced, trickier, harder part of the brain. And so if they're struggling, usually that's where they struggle. Well, she was the opposite. She was way ahead on like the more advanced stuff. Okay. But at the time, the class average of sight words was 43 words, and she had 3. She could sound out anything. And she was a super contextual reader. Like, she could read words she didn't even know and couldn't sign out just based on like the structure of the sentence. So it looked like she was like doing extremely well. But if you took most of those words, that sight words are words that aren't sound outable, like you just have to know you can't really sound that out. Those words, if you took them and put them someplace else, like on their own, she wouldn't know what they were. So she was really struggling, and she went into school. Like, if she couldn't go to school for some reason, she would be crying. She would cry that she couldn't go, even if she was like dying sick. She's like, "Can't I just go? I love it."
Wow. What's wrong with her? Did you drop her on her head?
I know, right? Like, she just loved it.
What child does that?
Halfway through the school year, she started the opposite. And she was like, "Can you pick me up on Friday at like before lunch, but after this time?" And I was like, "Why?" She's like, "After music, but before this other thing." And I was like, "What? Why? What's going on?" And she just broke down, and because this is all the things, it's the memory thing, it's the sight words. First of all, why they're having children write 3 sentences in kindergarten, I don't understand. Like, that's not developmentally where they should be, but that's a whole other issue. She said, because after music class, we have to do this thing where there's a word bank, and you have to write 3 sentences. And by the time I get to the second one, I can't remember what because it has to have a beginning, middle, and an end. She goes, and by the time to get to the third one, I can't remember what it is, and I have to erase it all, and I have to go back. And I said, "Honey, just write 3 random sentences. It doesn't matter." And that's when she goes, "No, it has to have a beginning, middle, and an end." Like, she was so driven to do things well and right. And she was being asked to do things that bumped up against every single thing that she struggled with. And it was ripping her apart. Like, I just watched her starting to like doubt herself and have these insecurities, and it was gutting. And her teacher kept trying to put her into the reading program, and they kept kicking her back out because she was good at all the things that they were working on in the reading program. She just didn't have the sight words. And so we went and met with the principal, because we had moved to this house specifically to get into this really good school district, because Baltimore is not known for its schools. There are some issues with the school. So we moved to a place where she would get really good support. And that teacher said the most depressing thing I have ever heard or the principal say. And I could tell it was gutting for him to say it. But what he said, "Ms. Hume, we all acknowledge that your daughter is not performing at her optimal potential. But he's like, but she's getting by. And we don't have the luxury of helping kids do more than get by when we have so many kids who are struggling to get by." And I was like, okay, then we will get her outside help. Like, because that was not a sufficient answer. Like, I could just see her little baby spirit breaking. And so we looked into this school where my son went, which, by the way, is a private school. And honestly, it felt like a Sophie's Choice moment at the moment. I'm like, we can't afford to send 2 kids here. Like, this is, so we started off just doing tutoring there. And what is fascinating is they know 175 different ways to get into a kid's brain. I mean, they just have endless ways. They're like, "Oh, that didn't work. What about this? What about this?" All they did. And this is what I think is so like, when you know how to be creative about how to get into a kid's brain, it doesn't have to be hard or laborious. They took the sight words and wrote them on these like laminated big footprint things and put them in the hallway. And then they would have her jump on the word and say it and clap at the same time. And that connection of the kinesthetic movement and the seeing the word and the saying it, it's like all of those things. Within 3 months, she was nearing close to the average number of sight words as the other kids.
Great.
Now, that did not solve her other issues, and we figured out how to get her into the school where my son was going, which is a whole other story. But it was just a very interesting, like, to hear that the principal, see, my brain just did that thing. To hear the principal say that was just, and the look in his eyes was so sad. But because of that, because we got them into that school, interestingly, they don't have as many of those horrible stories as some of the kids who don't find their way to that school until third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, who are just demoralized and crushing, you know, and I don't know that my kids fully appreciate what they missed out on in the best of ways. Because, and this is my favorite story ever. She was at the pool when she was about 6, and I picked her and her friends up, and they were just talking, and they were like, yeah, I don't like that kid. He blah, blah, blah. And I asked, my daughter said, yeah, he asked me where I went to school. And I said, Odyssey. And he said, isn't that the school for kids with dyslexia? And I said, yeah. And he said, I didn't know you were stupid. At which point I almost like drive off the road, because I'm like, do I need to go beat down a child? Like, but I just sort of looked in the rearview mirror, because I was like, is she upset? Is she mad? Like, and I said, what did you say? And she goes, I told him he must be stupid, because that's not how it works.
Good for her.
I know. But that's the whole point. Like, when kids get the support that they need, like neurodivergence, like, kids are going to learn to read. They're going to learn, like, one way or another, they're going to get through the things that make their brain different, one way or the other. The question is, do they get there via a pathway that leaves them cut and scraped and bruised and without self-confidence and self-assurance and self-advocacy, which is one of the things they actually teach at this school. Like, you have to be able to self-advocate for, I need extra time, or I need this, I need more help from the teacher, or like to be able to speak up for yourself. And if kids don't get that, I think that is what's at risk way more than their academic achievement or their whatever. They have brains that can do things other brains can do if they're just supported.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. I mean, the main thing is that they get the support they need, and especially when we were growing up, that was difficult. You know, it wasn't known of, it wasn't accepted, you know, so we had to go through certain things. But now there's a lot of support for our kids, which is great. So it makes things a little easier, without a doubt. So your kids are on the way and going in the right direction. So they're happy-go-lucky kids.
They are. So this is wild. My son is wildly all the things. Like he struggled with all the things, and he now reads, like, he's reading Dune right now.
Wow.
Like he actually reads for pleasure. Like, he's 21 and she's 17, and they're doing extremely well, but we all have our weird, goofy issues. You know, my son's super literal, and that's something he still very much struggles with, because he can misunderstand people very easily because he takes things so literal. And it is something that I still worry about him a little bit, imagining him in the business world, because when I send him texts, I reread it, and I'm like, oh, he's going to misunderstand that. And I change it, because I'm like, I speak Turner, and I know.
Okay, let's play with that. Let's see. Give us a, for instance, with literal, because this is something I have an issue with, because I tend to be as straight as a die, and I tend to shock a few people because I tend to be literal myself. So give us a, for instance, why
you're asking me to remember something.
Yeah, no, just give us something that worries you, that you think that's too literal, because literal is not necessarily a bad thing, but how far can it go before it becomes quite awkward, literally?
Yeah. So where I have seen it be an issue with him, and I always just like very compassionately walk it through with him so he sees, but I've seen him, one sort of pile of things is misunderstandings. Like there was a situation where he misunderstood, and I am going to struggle to remember the exact scenario. Like I won't remember the details. I'll remember how things felt. So you'll still get the story. Yeah. There was something in his syllabus that however she said it, I can see how he thought that's what she meant. I mean, the way she said it, because sometimes when people just write very quickly, they're speaking kind of vaguely or broadly or conceptually. And so he just took it that way. Here's actually, when I talk things through, I get to the bottom of it. It's most easily visible as seeming literal, but where the issue is, because when that's okay, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's a problem is where what is needed is some inference. Like, it's not that being literal is a problem. It's in places where he lacks the inference to infer what else was meant by that, or what else might be needed to like, well, if that person said that, what else were they trying to get? So it's like the expansion of the singular thought. Like, what else? Why would they ask that? And why else would that matter? And therefore, what else might you want to think about when you're writing that paragraph? So so where he does very well is in a class where he's here, where the teacher's explaining that, and really he has a personal sense of them. He'll do great, and he will knock that class out of the ballpark. This was an asynchronous class, so he wasn't getting that like personal context. He was just reading it in a paper.
Okay.
And his brain, I have almost the opposite problem. My brain constantly infers all the possible nuance, which is very valuable sometimes, but is also kind of overwhelming in here.
Yeah, too much information.
I don't need all that nuance sometimes.
Yeah.
But he has the opposite problem. He just sees the very specific thing that is said. And for a lot of situations, that's fine. But he can miss the nuance, and he can miss the initial social cues of someone. Like, sometimes he needs like a little bit, like, for them to have to get a little more escalated to be like, I said don't do that. And he's like, geez, you don't have to be that way. And I was like, I said it like 4 times. He's like, oh, I didn't hear that part. I'm like, I know. That's the problem. And so we just very compassionately share those things. We all have our own quirky bits. Like my auditory processing has become very, very challenging in the last couple of years. So, and they tease me we lovingly tease each other about these things in an effort to just talk about them.
Well, let me just ask you this quickly. Now, is it been a situation where, okay, he takes things very literal, but was it a situation earlier on that he never used to? He found situations so overwhelming, and what he's done, he's simplified things so it's not overwhelming? Or is it a situation he's always been literal?
So I think with him, it's really interesting. He's always been super fascinating to me, because I think in almost all ways, not just about how he thinks, it's like his dials just turn 1 or 2 clicks off of, I mean, a very quick side note, because my kids also have some like sensory issue stuff, and the tags, all those kinds of things. So one time I said to him, I think you'd really like Brussels sprouts. And he said, well, oh, okay, why? And I said, well, you like, when he was little, the vegetables he loved the most were kale and broccoli, which are ones kids don't normally like. And I said, well, they have that same kind of like darker, bitter flavor like kale and broccoli, and you love those. And he was like, what are you talking about? Kale and broccoli are sweet.
Wow.
I mean, I love kale and broccoli, but by no measure are they sweet. Like,
no,
they're not.
Not for me either.
No, I love them, but they're not sweet. And so it's like, I don't even know what to do with that information. Like, so, but everything about him is just like a little bit different. And so I don't ever really know. And when he was doing math in like 3rd and 4th grade, his teacher said to me, he is getting the right answer because he refused to he would not use scratch paper, which he was supposed to do. And so she was working with him. She's like, well, explain to me how you get there. She goes, I don't understand how he is coming up with the right answer. She's like, because he explained to me, and it's almost like he made up his own version of mathing that was coming out with the right answers, but it's not. Like, he was doing this weird thing where he'd like double it, and I don't remember any of what it was. It doesn't make sense, and I don't know why it works. But for right now, I'm not messing with it. There will come a time where this won't work, and he is going to have to she's like, I've tested a few things, and it won't always work, but it's working for now. So I don't feel like I can, in authentically argue with him because he's not wrong, and it feels worse to like tell him he's wrong when he's not wrong in the moment. She's like, but I don't understand how his math is mathing.
Okay, and can I ask this? She said it won't work forever. Did it work forever?
It didn't. No, it in fact did not.
Okay.
Like, it doesn't work when you get into more. This was like addition and subtraction.
Okay, cool.
And we still never figured out exactly how he was thinking of it, because it didn't make sense when he would try and explain it. My actual theory is that he just had an internal sense of it,
Okay.
And that he was making up a narrative because he had to, because she was asking him. Like, I think he just had a sense of what the answer is, because he also, before he'd ever seen a map in his life, he was like, Mimi's road makes a P, because he could tell by the way we were driving that you go up and come around and go this way. Like, he has a visual bird's eye sense of the world that, like, he always knows where we are and what direction something is, like, always. Like, that's not something my mom always said, like, Turner's smart about things you can't teach. And he's not great. Like, he's not always good at things you can teach, but he's really good at things you just can't even teach. So I love talking to people about their neurodivergence. That's why I'm so excited for your show, because they are like fascinating puzzles that can absolutely do things that other brains cannot do.
Totally.
And that is in exchange for other things brains can do. And you just have to sort out how to work around those things. But if you do that, then you can do some amazing stuff.
No, totally. And I'll tell you what, your story is so fascinating from the point of view of yourself to your children. And because you have this expansive information of experience when it comes to neurodivergent, I can see why you have clientele that actually gravitate to you, because you have this natural understanding and way about yourself to understand people that are of that way.
Yeah.
So with that also said, let's talk about from the business point of view. When you started wanting to get into this business that you started, was it a situation that you wanted to help neurodivergence from the off, or did it just end up being that way because you started pulling specific types of clients?
Yeah, no, I think that it definitely was not the intention, and it's nowhere. You wouldn't find that on my website. It doesn't say that. I just, for a million reasons, I have come to realize how, like, I don't know if I know any entrepreneurs who aren't at the very least ADD, if not also other full many different versions of some kind of neurodivergence, because there is, I think it is what draws you. I don't think we do as well in take tab B, stick in slot A situations. We do not thrive in that environment. And so that makes us less suited to a lot of typical off-the-shelf career functions where you just rinse and repeat something. I would get fired for 100% from a job like that. We absolutely need both structure, but also novelty. You have to have both. You have to. We need, like, I think of it as dotted line structure. It can't be too pinned in, but if you're not pinned in at all, that is also very not good for us. And so those things lend themselves. So what's so interesting is I spent my first 15 years of my career in an architecture firm.
Okay.
And the world of architecture and construction and whatnot also draw a lot of neurodivergent people. And I think part of it is because, like, architecture is very right brain and very left brain. You have, like, the building has to stand up and to be waterproof. So there's very much like, you don't get to mess with those constraints are in there. And then there's the creativity piece, and you get some of both. So a lot of architects, absolutely, a lot of architects have some amount of neurodivergence. Most entrepreneurs absolutely have it. And so my business was designed around the way my brain works. I facilitate leadership meetings, and I work one-on-one with business owners, because when someone's talking, it's like my version of I see dead people. I can separate, and I literally see it. Like I see the separation between fact and like what's a fact and what's like a fear or a story they're making up or like, and so I can separate those things out. And then those facts sort of also then come out into like time considerations. Like, and so it all boils down to like, what's the first next thing you need to sort out to create that clarity. And then like these things can wait. And these things we actually have to sort through in a little bit more of like business therapy kind of stuff. But it's when they're all blurred together that people get stuck. And so and that's less important than just the more I leaned into what does work from my brain, the more my business takes off. If I try to make it look like what everyone else says my business should look like, because that's what works, that's where I've struggled and bumped up against things that feel more like failure. Whereas where I have just leaned into like, nope, this is what is Jody shaped. That's what works. And that is my sole parenting focus with my kids has been, how can you be the most Turner-shaped human being, the most Kaya-shaped human being possible? And I have never regretted that as like the North Star guiding principle with them.
No, you're totally right. I mean, that resonates with me because even when I was setting up the business and also the podcast, you know, they say a podcast, you must do it this way, that way, and also ask certain questions and etc. And I thought to myself, there's no way I can do that. I can't structure things. And I like things to be quite dynamic too. So can you imagine having the same questions all the time? And that would just do my head in. And not only that, I don't think I'll even remember the questions.
Exactly.
Can you imagine the kind of podcast I would create? You know, I have to stay to a structure, but I can't remember the structure. What a mess that would be.
That is literally my life. Like
exactly.
That is literally my life.
Hence the conversation we have.
Yeah, well, but this is exactly it. So I started, I took this like coaches training and then it makes perfect sense to look at other successful coaches and say like, what are they doing? And I should emulate whatever, you know, most people do these like 2 sessions a month or session a week or 1 session, but like whatever. So I was doing that for a while and I was like pulling my hair out with people calling and they'd be like, okay, so what should I focus on today? I don't know, and I can't even tell you how much it was irritating me. And there's like a thing in coaching where, I mean, I did my training like 20 years ago, so that this may not be true as much anymore, but the sense of like, if not every time, but there was like sort of a structure of like, you give them homework, something that they're supposed to do in between the calls. And I just like, sometimes there's something I want someone to think about or work on, but it just always felt so arbitrary. And frankly, with the clients I was working with, last thing they needed was like more stuff to do. And I didn't like it. And so I just started playing with it and I took away scheduled sessions. And then I hit this like nerve, like in the best of way, I hit this thread of what I really wanted to do was what entrepreneurs really needed, which was on-call support. Everyone else in my business that I know likes to like get clients in so they have like X amount of things already booked in a week. I hate having my time booked out in advance. I don't mind spending my entire work week working from beginning to end, but I don't want 3 weeks from now to already be booked out. So I don't have options of what to do like that. I literally start to like pay. I'm like, no. Ditto. Yeah, I was like, I can't do it. So the way I do it, I just went for it. I like most of my clients now pay a retainer. A few buy like a block of sessions they can schedule whenever they want, but most of them it's a retainer. It's unlimited, which also people say is not how you're supposed to do it. But my people are so busy, they're not abusing it. The monthly fee, they call whenever they text me, do you have some time this afternoon? And I either do or I don't. It works out. Like it always works out. It is solely based on what feels good and right to me. And it hits a thread with them because I'm there when they need me.
Yeah, beautiful, Jody.
And it works.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, that's the way I run things. The business is supposed to run around you. at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, also, we're there to help people. And if we're not helping ourselves before we help others, then we're always going to have issues. And what you've done, you've helped yourself in the lifestyle you want to lead.
Right.
And you resonate with the same people that want to
Right.
resonate with your lifestyle.
And it's also trusting that if you have a desire for this thing, there's a good chance there's like the other puzzle piece to match.
Yeah.
Like there are people who need it. And the thing is, if you put it out there and no one bites at it, then maybe it does need to be a little bit different than you have. But start with that. Start with what feels good and right for you. Because much like in parenting, you know, unhappy parents are not good parents. Unhappy entrepreneurs are not good leaders. And that doesn't mean, you know, you always get your way and everything's sunshine and roses. Of course not. But there are just some things that you have to identify as really important for you. And those things need to be woven into the fabric of the business so that you can thrive.
What a wonderful way that you lead with your business. And I'm sure they love the way that you actually structure and schedule everything, where everything's flexible for everybody. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Oh, it works so well for me. I've met, you know, consultants or coaches, and I can just see in their eyes because that they're sort of mortified by that idea that someone could be like, do you have time this afternoon? They hate that. And I'm like, well, that's great, because it wouldn't work for you. Like, that is actually perfect for me. And I had the best confirmation ever because I had this one client I was like testing it out with, and she texted me on a Saturday. Because the bottom line is, I don't work with people who aren't respectful of my time. They don't expect me to literally be available 30 seconds from now every time they call. Like, they know their other clients and whatnot. And so she texted me on a Saturday and said, hey, can I get on your calendar early next week as soon as you have time? Because on Saturday, so she's saying like on Monday, whatever. I really need to talk this through and blah, 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 blah. Well, it just so happened my family was gone, and I was sitting there in probably my second hour of scrolling Netflix trying to find something to watch. I was bored to tears. I was delighted to take her. I was like, hey, it's Saturday, so no worries if not, but do you want to chat now? And she's like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. So we talked for an hour, maybe even an hour and a half. I don't remember. And she has continued. Now, if I'd been snuggled up on the couch with my daughter watching a movie, I would have said, how about first thing Monday morning, you know, like that, or I wouldn't even have looked at the text until the movie was over. But it worked for me. And so, I mean, this is the other thing, kind of goes back to the self-advocacy. It's like knowing yourself and then also trusting yourself to hold your own boundaries around a thing. Like, I will take care of me, and therefore I can have this like flexibility.
Of course.
And she still talks about how there was like a month where she hadn't used it at all. And so I just reached out and was like, hey, just checking that this retainer model still works. You know, we didn't talk this last month. I just always want to make sure you're getting value. She's like, Jody, you took my call on a Saturday night. She's like, the fact that I know you're there is the value. And it's not about how often we talk. I don't have to talk to you X number of times for it to be valuable, because when I need you, you're there.
Quality. The quality at the right time, you hit the right note. What a genius, Jody. You did exactly what was right for you, and then eventually that was right for your clientele. And with that said, unfortunately, I have to just put a line in the sand, and we're just going to have to leave that. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I could have easily spoken to you a few more hours, but unfortunately cannot be. Jody, thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything you want to say to the listeners before we wrap up?
You know, probably just some version of like, when it feels like there's something weird about you, just trust that that is actually what makes you most you. And it's like the key that, because actually, and I won't tell you this whole story, but there is the word weird is originally WYRD. I will not remember from what language that is. You'll have to go look it up, but I think it's like Celtic or something. It means destiny.
Wow.
And so like not being insecure about weirdness, not trying to cover it up, not trying to shave it off, but lean into it, breathe air into it, light it up, spark the flame. Like, that is what you are bringing into the world. It's
no, totally. And being different is significantly better than being the same as most other people. if you want to stand out from the crowd and you want to be different, then how different can you be when you're neurodivergent? It's a beautiful thing to be. I love it. It took me time to accept it,
Yes.
but I see the power in it for sure. How can they contact you? What's the detail? Obviously, I'm going to put the details down below, but just tell them how they can contact you if they need any support or help.
Yep. So if you go to atthecore.com, all my contact information is there. I do have a page called, it's atthecore.com/gift. And there's a few things. There's a link for just a connection call, I call it. That's we're not talking about working together in that call. That is just to connect, ask a question or whatever. There's a few of those spaces available each week. But then I also, for any time I do podcast interviews, there are discounted, I think it's half price actually, to like single sessions and things like that. I add things to that page all the time, so I don't remember what's there right now. But there's always something there, so you can look anytime you want. So
okay, no problems. Well, I'll put the details down below, listeners, so just have a look down below and you'll be able to connect with her. And please do, as you can see, she's a bit of a genius, but approachable at the same time.
Aww.
And with that said, sayonara, everybody, and see you next time.